Hello, everybody. Start off getting tongue-tied. That's a good start. Alright. Hello, everybody. This is Handy Andy back once again for another video about math and things. And this particular time, we are revisiting the subject from the last time, which was fractions and decimals, or fractions versus decimals. And basically, last time I explained what is the difference between fractions and decimals, and I explained it through diagrams, as you can see sort of over here. So that's basically it. So this time I'm explaining the same thing basically. What's the difference between fractions and decimals? And I'm explaining it, or at least attempting to explain it, through numbers. And although I did use a few numbers over here, but it's just numbers is the basis of what I'm using this time. So, yeah. So, hopefully you find this video to be of some help, and if there's anything that I completely muddle up my explanation or whatever and get all confusing and whatever, just go ahead and leave a comment and ask me to clarify something, and I'll see what I can do to help explain it to you or whatever. So anyways, fractions versus decimals. So, in the first place, we have fractions. So, basically, the first question I'm going to be answering is, what is a fraction and what is a decimal? So, yeah, and by the way, if you're interested in the previous video that I explained over here, there will be a link on the screen, assuming I remember to put it, to that video, but I don't think you need to watch that video to understand this one, because I'm basically explaining the same thing again, just from a different angle. So, yeah, but it'll be there, if I remember, if you want it. So anyways, fractions versus decimals. So, the first question is, what is a fraction? And the second question is, what is a decimal? And then the third question is, what is the difference? At least I think that's the third question, unless there's another question in between that comes up. But I think that's the third question. Anyways, fractions. So, fractions are like, let's say 1 over 2, that's 1/2. And you could say like, let's say 1 over 4, that's another fraction. Let's say 1 over 5. We could even say, let's say 2 over 4. That's 2 over 2, which is actually still a fraction, strangely enough. Basically what a fraction is some number divided by some other number, basically. So, basically, some number over another number. So basically, I keep saying basically a lot, but that's because this is the basics of the explanation. So, anyways, basically a fraction is, it's a number divided by another number. So basically, this one would be 1 divided by 2. So if you took 1 of something and divided it into 2 pieces, then you have a half of your 2 pieces. No, you don't. You have a half of your whole thing. That is getting very, very confusing. Let's see if I can explain it this way. So first let's get an example of what happens when, let's take another one, let's take 3 over 4. Basically that's a number divided by another number, and if we were to divide that out, so let's get our little box here, and that is way longer than I need it. So, anyways, let's do 3 divided by 4, and let's actually divide it out and see what we get. So, 4 goes into 3 0 times evenly. 4 doesn't go evenly into 3 because 4 is bigger than 3. So, 4 goes into 3.0, and I'm assuming that you already know how this division stuff works. And if you're wondering how division works, if you haven't learned that yet or whatever and you'd like to learn, leave a comment and, I don't know, maybe I'll do another video explaining how division works. But anyways, so or at least attempting to explain. So anyways, 4 goes into 3.0. Well, we can figure that 4 goes into 30. How many times does 4 go into 30? 4 goes into 30, 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, 28, 32. So not quite 8 times, so it goes in 7 times. 4 goes into 37 times. And 4 goes into 37 times. And how many are we left with? 7 times 4 is, what did I say, 28? Yeah, 28. 7 times 4 is 28. And that leaves us with 2. And then how many times does 4 go into 2? 4 doesn't go into 2 evenly. So we'll add another decimal place. And 4 goes into 20. 4, 8, 12, 16, 20. That's 5. 4 goes into 20 5 times. And that's even. So 4 goes into 3.75 times. So that is a decimal. 4 goes into 3, basically that's 3 divided by 4, that's what we got there. That is a fraction, that's a decimal. So that's just related them together. So let's see if, I'm going to try to explain this from a different angle. So basically, yes, that is a decimal, that's what a decimal is. It's, here's your ones place, so how many whole things you have, and then here's your tens place, there's your one. Let's explain it from over here. So here's your decimal point. You go bigger, you get, let's say this place is your ones, is how many whole things you have. And then this place would be, and I'm just putting a random number in the place, it's just which place it's in that matters. This place would be your tens, how many, like if you were to take the bunch of things that you have and group them into groups of 10, how many of those groups you would have. That's basically what that is. Tens. And then let's say this is how many hundreds you have, and then this is how many thousands you have, this is how many 10,000s you have, and then this is how many 100,000s you have, and we could keep going and keep going and keep going. So the next one would obviously be millions and everything like that. So now we have 9,801,532. That's all going on the larger side of the decimal place. If you were to go on the smaller side of the decimal place, then you go, so here's your ones, how many whole things you have, and then going down you have your tenths, which is a hard word to pronounce, I find. Your tenths is, let's say you have 5 tenths, and that's basically you take a whole whatever, like the last time we did pies. So you take a whole pie and you divide it into 10 pieces, like whatever, and then you have how many tenths of a pie you have. So this is how many tenths of a whatever. This is how many hundredths. This is how many thousandths. This is your 10,000ths. This is your 100,000ths. And then this is your millionths. And that's basically how it goes. So it just keeps dividing into, you take your tenths and divide your tenths into 10 pieces each, and you get how, like, you get your whole thing divided into 100 pieces, and keep going like that. So that's basically a decimal. So it gets bigger that way, and it gets smaller that way. And that's basically what it is I'm assuming you've seen I'm assuming that you have seen this division before. Get my words in the right order in my sentence. It might make more sense. But if you have seen this division before, that's basically what it is. When you divide something out, you divide it out and you get your decimals. And basically, your original division problem, let's say it's 5 divided by 8, for instance. 5 divided by 8, you could do the whole thing again, and you wind up with a decimal. Or you could even restate this, because 5 divided by 8 is the same thing as saying 5 divided by 8. And 5 divided by 8, 5 over 8, is a fraction. So there you go. So that's basically basically what a fraction is, and you can take any two numbers. So if you really wanted to get complicated, you could do things like say that, let's divide this out first. So before we move on to more complicated, let's divide this out. So 5 divided by 8. So 8 goes into 5, it doesn't go in evenly. So let's add a decimal place. 8 goes into 50. And basically what we're doing now is we are doing, it's not actually 8 going into 50. It's 8 going into 50 tenths. So you take your whatever you have, and you divide each of them into 10 pieces, and then how many times can you take 8 sets of 10 pieces is basically what this is doing. So 8 goes into 50 tenths. 8 goes into 50 how many times? That would be, well, 8 times 5 is 40. 8 times 6 is 48. So 6, because 8 times 7 is 56, which is bigger than 50. So you can get 6 sets of 8 out of 50. And 6 times 8 is 48. So now we've got 48, we got 2, add another decimal place, 20, 8 goes into 20, 8, 16, 24, so it goes in 2 times, and that would be 16, and we're left with 4, and 40, and 8 goes into 40, 8 times 5 is 40, as I said before, so that is now even, and that is a very squished 5, so let's fix that. There we go. So yeah, so 5 divided by 8 is the same thing as 0.625. So we could even say 5 divided by 8 equals 0.625. So in this case, that fraction is a decimal. It can be said as a decimal, basically. 5 over 8 is the same thing as 0.625. So back to what I was saying earlier, just like detouring a little bit before, I'm going to keep going talking about this, but we're just detouring a little bit just to talk a little bit. So, as I said, a fraction can be anything divided by anything, basically. So, although you probably couldn't divide a chimney by a squirrel or whatever. I don't know, maybe you could, but anyways, it can be any number divided by anything. So you could even take, like, let's say a decimal of 0.75, 0.75, and divide it by 0.625. And that is still a fraction. And that gets a little more complicated than we're going to be getting this time. But yeah, so that's basically it. You could even, if you want to go even more interesting, you could even do fractions divided by fractions. Like, let's say you wanted to take, let's say this original 3 over 4, 3 divided by 4, 3 over 4, or 3/4, and you wanted to divide that by 5/8. You could even do that. And then there's ways to figure that out, what number that is, and all kinds of stuff like that. But that's more complicated than we're getting into right now. So, back to the subject over here. Back to the subject we were talking about. If I can remember what that was, because I don't actually remember what that was. That's the problem with going off all over the place, is forgetting where you were going. Oh yes, I was going to say that, so 5 over 8 is a fraction. That equals the decimal 0.625. But you could even say, because this is 6/10, this is 2/100, and this is 5/1000. Or let's try another example, a little bit simpler. Let's go back to this example. Let's write it down here. So we got 3 over 4. Hopefully I'm not bouncing around so much that it's hard to follow me or whatever, but anyways. 3 over 4 equals 0.75. So that fraction is a decimal. And you can even take that, because that's 7/10, and that's 5/100. You could even write that as that's not 7. Okay, let's try that again. You can even write that as 7/10, 7/10, plus 5/100. And then that's the same thing. 3/4 equals, as we just discovered, 3/4 equals 0.75. And that equals 7/10 plus 5/100. So that's what it is, 7/10 and 5/100. Or you could even say, because that, like, your tenths there, how many hundredths is that? Basically, that's 70 hundredths. So you could even say that you have 75 hundredths. And then that's actually really easy to work with, because that's all you need to do for any decimal that you want to look at. Let's say you had a decimal, let's say 0.3210567 or something like that. You could take any decimal, and that is tenths, hundredths, thousandths, 10,000ths, 100,000ths, millionths, 10 millionths, 100 millionths, and you could even, so that's a certain number of 100 millionths, basically, of a whatever you're measuring, and you could take that and say 3, 2, 1, 0, 5, 6, 7, 8 divided by, that's 3, 6, 7, 8, so 7, 8, there we go. So you could even say you have 32,105,678 of whatever that is. Let's add some commas in there. 100 millionths, there. So you could even say that you have 32,105,678 100 millionths, because it's the same thing, basically. This means the same as this. Let's do a simpler example of this, for instance. This is the same thing as, hopefully I made this make some sense, but anyways, this is the same thing as saying 625 thousandths, basically. So that's basically it. So any fraction, basically, can be divided out. If it can be divided out, it can be turned into a decimal. That's what happens when you divide it out. And then a decimal is a fraction. So you just take your fraction, like you just take your decimal and you turn it into a fraction like that. Hopefully that's making some sense. I think I kind of was making that rather confusing. So, yeah, hopefully that made sense. And if you have any questions, or if that actually did make sense even, and you'd like to tell me, then go ahead and leave a comment and whatever. But anyways, so yeah, so basically what I'm saying is that the same thing that I said in the last video, that a decimal is a fraction, but a fraction is not necessarily a decimal. So let's do another one. Let's say one like 1/12, okay? So you have a fraction, you have 1/12 of something. You can take your 1/12 and divide it out again. 1 divided by 12, and 12 goes into 1, it doesn't go into 1 evenly. 12 goes into 10, doesn't go into 10 evenly. 12 goes into 100, it does go into 100 evenly. And how many times would that be? Let's figure that out. So 10 goes into 100. There's a motor outside. I don't know if you can hear that, but anyways. 12 goes into 100. Well, 10 goes into 100 10 times. 12, let's try 9 times. What's 9 times 12? That would be 90 plus 2 times 9, that would be 18, so that's 108, so that's too much. So let's try 8 times 12. 8 times 12 is 80 plus 16 is 96. Yes. So 8 times 12 is 96. So, excuse me. 8 times 12 is 96. So let's write down 96 here. And we got 4 left over. And then we need to do 12 goes into 40. How many times? 12 goes into 40 3 times, because 3 times 12 is 36. And, whoops, I am jumping ahead of myself. Do the steps in order, silly. Alright, we got 4 left over. Oh boy, okay, pull a number out of your head, and you wind up with a confusing situation. So, we have a repeating situation here. So basically, let's extend this. 12 goes into 40 3 times. 3 times 12 is 36. And then we're left with 4, and add another 0. 12 goes into 40. It's the same thing as before, so it's going to be 3 again, and keeps going. This one repeats. So we got, my 3's are getting all messed up. We got a repeating decimal, basically. So yeah, so that's a thing. So that is to illustrate what I was going to explain later, actually, that a decimal is a fraction. As you could see from before, a decimal can be easily turned back into a fraction, because it is a fraction, only it's written differently, but it is a fraction. A decimal is a fraction, but a fraction is not necessarily a decimal, and this is a good illustration of that, because no matter how many times you divide this, it never quite works out. You always have a little bit of extra left over. So you end up with a repeating decimal. So 1 divided by 12, when you try to write that as a decimal, it is 0.08333333, and it keeps repeating your 3 because it doesn't work as a decimal. Because basically what a decimal is like your first decimal place is 1 over 10, and your second decimal place is basically the same thing as saying, let's write this out over here. This is basically the same thing as saying you have 0 ones, 0, plus you have 0 tenths, plus you have 8 hundredths, plus you have 3 thousandths, plus you have 3 10,000ths, and it just keeps going like that. That's basically what this is saying. Hopefully this is making some sense to you, and yeah. So, I'm just going to think, was there something else that I wanted to say? So the last thing I'm going to do just before we end the video is I'm going to give you one more example where I take a fraction and turn it into a decimal and back into a fraction, basically, and basically do it like that. So basically, let's try 3 over 8. The fraction, that's 3/8. 3/8 is the same thing as 3 divided by 8. So 3 divided by 8, let's do that this way. 3 divided by 8. Why did I just write a 3 there? I meant to write a 0. Okay. 8 goes into 30. 8, 16, 24, 32, so 3 times. And I'm jumping a bunch of stages here, but anyways, just so that we can do the division faster. So 8 goes into 33 times, and 3 times 8 is 8, 16, 24, so 24, that is 5. Write my numbers properly, there we go, and that's 6 left over. Let's add a decimal, 60, 8 goes into 60. Well, let's see, 5 times 8 is 40, 8 times 8 is 64, 7 times 8 is 56. So 7 times 8, and we got 56, and 56 leaves us with 4 left over, and 5 times 8 is 40, so 5. So we just took 3/8, divided it out, and we've got 0.375. So that means 3/8, 3 divided by 8 is the same thing as saying 0.375. And 0.375, we could take that, and that is 375 thousandths. And then we could take this again, just to sort of show what I'm meaning. We could take this and 375 thousandths, 375 divided by 1,000. 1,000 goes into 3,750 3 times. Let's put our decimal place in the right place. 3 times. And 3 times 1,000 is 3,000. And when we subtract it, we're left with 750. And so let's bring down a 0. 7,500. 1,000 goes into 7,500. Basically what I'm showing is that take a fraction, you can divide it out and turn it into a decimal. And why you can just take that decimal and add a number with the same number of zeros underneath it is because it actually works. So take it, turn it into a decimal, add, like do that decimal, do the number over a number with the with the number of zeros in it that you need, and you can take that and divide it back out, and it works out to the same thing. So 1,000 goes into 7,500 7 times, and that's 7,000, and then that leaves us with 500 left over, and let's bring down a 0, and we got 1,000 goes into 5,000 5 times, and there you go. We have our 0.375. So that's basically to show that this number, this decimal here, is the same thing as this fraction here. So, yeah. So hopefully this made some sense, and it was helpful to you in some way, and whatever. And, yeah, hopefully you enjoyed the video, and if you have any questions about anything, then go ahead and leave a comment, and I will see if I can answer you or see what I can do about it. But anyways, yeah. So hopefully you enjoyed the video, and this is Handy Andy signing off, and see you later. Bye-bye!